The Phaedo is Plato's account of Socrates' final hours before his execution. It takes place in a prison cell in Athens, where Socrates is surrounded by his closest friends and students. He has been sentenced to death for corrupting the youth and introducing strange gods. In a few hours, he will drink hemlock and die. Instead of lamenting his fate, Socrates spends his last day discussing the immortality of the soul and why a true philosopher should not fear death. The dialogue is narrated by Phaedo, one of Socrates' young followers, who is recounting the events to a friend. Phaedo describes the surreal atmosphere. Everyone is weeping except Socrates, who is calm, cheerful, and eager to talk philosophy. He tells them to stop crying. Death is not something to mourn if you have lived philosophically. If you are interested in philosophy that confronts mortality with courage and reason, subscribe to SnapOldWisdom. We break down the books that force you to think about what actually matters. Subscribe now and let us get into why Socrates welcomed death. The conversation begins with Socrates explaining why philosophers should not fear death. He argues that philosophy is practice for dying. The body distracts the soul with pleasures, pains, and desires. A philosopher spends their life training the soul to detach from the body and focus on truth. Death is simply the final separation of soul from body, the completion of what philosophy has been preparing for all along. Socrates then offers 4 arguments for why the soul is immortal. The first is the argument from opposites. Everything comes from its opposite. Hot from cold, sleeping from waking, living from dead. If living comes from dead, then the dead must have come from living. The soul must exist before birth and after death, cycling between life and death eternally. The second is the argument from recollection. We have knowledge of things we never learned in this life, like perfect equality or perfect beauty. These concepts cannot come from experience, because experience only shows us imperfect examples. We must be recollecting knowledge the soul had before birth. This means the soul existed before the body. The third is the argument from affinity. Socrates distinguishes between things that are composite and things that are simple. Composite things, like the body, can be broken apart and destroyed. Simple things, like the soul, cannot. The body is visible, changing, and mortal. The soul is invisible, unchanging, and immortal. The soul is more like the eternal forms than like physical objects. The fourth and final argument is the most complex. Socrates argues that the soul is the principle of life. It brings life to the body. Life and death are opposites. The soul cannot admit its opposite, death, any more than fire can admit cold. When death approaches the body, the soul must either withdraw or be indestructible. Since the soul is the cause of life, it cannot die. These arguments are not airtight. Plato knows this. The dialogue includes objections from Socrates' students, particularly Simmias and Cebes. They challenge his reasoning, and Socrates refines his arguments in response. The point is not to prove immortality beyond doubt. The point is to show that a philosopher can face death with reason and composure. After hours of discussion, a servant arrives and tells Socrates it is time. He must drink the hemlock. Socrates asks if he can pour a libation to the gods. The servant says no. The poison is measured precisely. Socrates drinks it calmly. His friends break down weeping. Socrates scolds them. He sent the women away earlier because he did not want wailing. He wants to die in peace. The poison begins to take effect. Socrates walks around to help it spread through his body. When his legs grow heavy, he lies down. The servant checks his feet. No feeling. The numbness creeps upward. Socrates remains lucid, talking to his friends until the very end. When the poison reaches his heart, he will die. His last words are strange and enigmatic. He says, "Credo, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Pay the debt and do not neglect it." Asclepius is the god of healing. Offering a rooster was done after recovering from illness. Socrates seems to be saying that death is a cure, a healing, a release from the sickness of embodied existence. Then he dies. Phaedo ends with one of the most famous lines in philosophy. He says, "Such was the end of our friend, a man who, we would say, was of all those we have known the best, and also the wisest and the most just." This is Plato's eulogy for Socrates, not as a martyr, but as a philosopher who lived and died in accordance with reason. So what is the Phaedo actually about? On one level, it is about the immortality of the soul. Socrates offers arguments that the soul existed before birth and will continue after death. Whether you find these arguments convincing depends on your metaphysical commitments. Plato believed in the forms and the separation of soul and body. Most modern readers do not. On another level, the Phaedo is about how to face death. Socrates does not argue that death is good because the soul is immortal. He argues that a life spent in pursuit of wisdom makes death less frightening. If you have spent your life detaching from bodily pleasures and training your mind, you have already practiced dying. The actual moment of death is just the completion of a process you have been engaged in all along. This is a form of memento mori, the practice of remembering that you will die. But it is not morbid. It is liberating. If you acknowledge mortality and live accordingly, death loses its power over you. You stop postponing what matters. You stop clinging to things that will not last. You focus on what is eternal: truth, beauty, virtue. The dialogue also raises the question of whether philosophy is a kind of suicide. If the goal is to separate the soul from the body, why not just kill yourself? Socrates rejects this. Suicide is forbidden because we are the property of the gods, and we cannot destroy what belongs to them. We must wait for the gods to release us, as they are doing to Socrates through his execution. This reasoning is tied to Plato's theology and would not convince an atheist. But the underlying point stands. Philosophy is not about escaping life. It is about living well while preparing for death. You do not rush toward death. You live fully, with the awareness that death is coming. Here is what you do with the Phaedo. First, confront your own mortality honestly. Most people avoid thinking about death. Socrates made it the center of his philosophy. He did not do this to be depressing. He did it because acknowledging death clarifies what matters. If you knew you would die tomorrow, what would you regret not doing? Do that thing now. Second, detach from what will not last. The body, wealth, reputation, pleasure. All of these are temporary. Socrates spent his life training his soul to care less about them. This does not mean becoming an ascetic. It means not letting these things control you. Enjoy them if they come. Release them when they go. Third, focus on what is eternal. For Plato, this meant the forms: truth, beauty, justice. For you, it might mean relationships, ideas, contributions that outlast your physical existence. What will remain after you are gone? That is where your attention should be. The Phaedo has influenced philosophy, theology, and literature for over 2,000 years. Early Christians adopted Plato's view of the soul's immortality and merged it with their own theology. The idea that the soul is imprisoned in the body and released at death became central to Christian thought. Socrates' calm acceptance of death became a model for martyrs. Modern readers often find the arguments for immortality unconvincing. The argument from opposites assumes a cyclical view of existence that is not obvious. The argument from recollection depends on the theory of forms, which many reject. The argument from affinity conflates different kinds of simplicity. The final argument is circular. It assumes what it is trying to prove. But dismissing the Phaedo for weak arguments misses the point. The dialogue is not a logical proof. It is a demonstration of how to face death with courage and reason. Socrates knows his arguments are not perfect. He offers them anyway, because wrestling with the question is more important than arriving at certainty. Philosophy is the activity of questioning. not the possession of answers. The real power of the Phaedo is in the scene itself. Socrates, surrounded by grieving friends, choosing to spend his final hours doing philosophy. He could have spent the day saying goodbye, expressing regrets, comforting his family. Instead, he argues about the nature of the soul. This is what it means to be a philosopher. Even at the edge of death, the pursuit of truth takes priority. Here is the bottom line. The Phaedo is about Socrates' last hours in prison, discussing the immortality of the soul before drinking hemlock. He offers 4 arguments: opposites, recollection, affinity, and life itself. His friends weep. He scolds them. He drinks the poison calmly. His last words suggest death is a healing. Then he dies. Plato calls him the best, wisest, and most just man. The dialogue shows how to face death with philosophy instead of fear. It is not about proving the soul is immortal. It is about living in such a way that death becomes irrelevant. This video was created by combining human research and script writing with AI-assisted visuals and production. Links to the book and related resources are in the description below.